Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your boy, Adrian, here, and I am joined by the great co-host, Miss Brianna Clark. Bri, what's happening?
On the track.
Here it is. How are you today?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
I am doing well. It's been a long week.
It's been a very long week.
It has been
We're
a long.
here.
We are here. If you are new to the pod, we really exist to unlock authenticity. We believe authenticity unlocks human flourishing, and that's really our desires. We want to see human beings live out to be who they've been designed and created to be. And so we talk on a wide range of topics that actually really dig into people really figuring out how to be their true authentic self. We hear in today's world that word authentic is used a lot, but I actually believe it is misused in what we actually mean by authentic. We define authentic around here as self-awareness and resilience to remain self-aware. And we call it new rules because everybody's going to play by a set of rules, but most times we don't play by the rules meant for the game we are actually playing. And so in order to live an authentic life, you're going to have to write new rules. And so we talk about, as I said, a lot of different things, have different people coming on the pod in the future. And so we hope you enjoy it. If you do, make sure if you see anything come across your story, reels, whatever, share it. Leave a review on iTunes and or wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Bri for Spotify people, you know.
Spotify gang.
Yeah, whatever. Apple Music for life. But
No. Apple doesn't need to be good at everything.
That's okay.
And
So
Spotify wins on the music app.
so tell me why you like Spotify way more than Apple Music. I know we just went off
Do you
track.
use Spotify? No. Spotify is so much better. Spotify creates such curated playlists for you. And that's the best part. And you get your Spotify Wrapped, all of that. It's just so good. Every time I go on my Spotify app when I'm listening to music, I know there's going to be like 10 to 20 playlists that are curated for me based off of whatever mood that I'm in and what the algorithm has learned that I liked, even with new music.
Wow, so you don't know. So you really don't know yourself. So you have to have a computer to know
Oh
what,
my
to know who
gosh.
you are. So hey,
Do
so
you
here
not
on
like your curated ads that you always buy your new clothes on your Instagram ads?
listen, we're not talking about me. We're talking about
Oh
you
my
right now.
I'm
So
deflecting.
hey, so here's what we're doing. Hey. I get it. It's a Gen Z type of thing. You know, again, us Gen Xers right now, we didn't have the luxury of growing up with everything curated towards us. So we have to go on the grind and find music that fits us. It just fits you. I get it. It's just, listen, that's how you grew up. So I'm glad that you actually like it.
And how much time do you spend on TikTok?
Not that much.
okay. Because you don't like the curated content on TikTok.
Whatever. Again, this isn't about me. This is about you. But anyway, all that being said, Bri, I got a question for you. What do you think? Again, you know, if, for those who are listening and you may be new here, there is an age gap between me and Bri. Again, you know, she is Gen Z, I am Gen X. And so, like, you know, there is definitely like cultural, not even so much cultural difference, but really there's like those age differences. So I want to ask this question. Like, what do you actually think about like politics?
Oof. To me, politics is incredibly overwhelming. When you think about politics, I'm immediately reminded of the turmoil and the chaos. I don't really think about what good order could look like. I think about the pain that poor order can cause.
Wow.
And I think I've grown up seeing the people before me be so like it's something that causes so much fighting.
Yeah.
And to see that it just gets exhausting. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I just don't trust it because of the way that media plays a part of it. Like anytime I see news, for example, there was just just a school shooting, so there's been a lot of conversations about like gun control.
Yep.
And so when it comes to critical thinking, anytime something happens, I want to think about like the policies that are in place and what could be better and what needs to grow. Yeah. And it's really hard to find out what policies are in place. Like it's really hard to find that stuff out. Because everything's so biased. Yeah. What you just can't Google something online and expect it to be true. So I'm definitely not talking about the shooting in itself, but the policies that are in place to protect children and teachers in the school system. Yep. And it's just really hard to find those things out, especially when you get into the complexities where it's like as a nation and then as a state and counties and all of that stuff. And so it just gets really overwhelming and exhausting, to be honest.
Yeah. And the reason why I asked that question is because I think, you know, sometimes people can look at your generation and be like, oh, they're not, I mean, are they involved? Do they want to? Which, again, I think your generation really is very much so active. And, like, man, if there's something you guys stand against, I mean, it's gang. You guys are going after it fully, whatever it is. And I think about kind of coming up when I was your age, I'm like, yeah, I was kind of the same way in this sense of, like, I wasn't, you guys are way more involved or thoughtful than I was. I mean, when I was 24, like, yeah, kind of, okay, present, but I wasn't like diving into like how I think about it now, and I think the reason why I say it, because when you get older, you just romanticize how you thought you were. You think when you were like, oh man, when I was that age, I was super involved. You're like, no, we weren't. We try to make us be way better. That's why, when older people's like, man, how I grew up, I'm like, yeah, it wasn't as tough as you're saying it is. And I think that, and I'm just always curious about just in the age gap, just kind of what you guys are thinking about politics. And here's the thing, it's way more partisan than it's ever been than when I grew up. It was always, Republicans, Democrats, whatever, but you always would see people kind of make it work. Now it's just like, it is just, how do we divide even more? And so I just wanted to see kind of your thoughts on that, of just kind of how you see it with all the divisiveness, all the things, how you actually view politics. Because some people your age are like, it's just so overwhelming, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, because anytime someone gets really overwhelmed, an appropriate response is to just disengage. And so I know that that's something that I'll do. And you can almost become desensitized to information when something is happening so often and so frequently. Yeah. You're just like, I don't really know what to believe anymore. This is really becoming a lot, so I'm going to disengage. And then something might happen that's really grand that like hits a nerve in you, and so you come at really strong. And so that's what I feel like is consistently happening. It's like disengage really strong, yeah. And then that just promotes more of the exhaustion and continues the cycle. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Before we jump into what we're going to talk about today on the pod, I do have one more thing. What's one of your favorite podcasts right now you're listening to?
Am I allowed to
what do you mean? I asked you what your favorite podcast is.
Okay, my favorite podcast is Call Her Daddy with Alex Cooper.
Wow. Okay, Bri.
That and Diary of a CEO.
Okay, Diary of a CEO and Call Her Daddy. Okay,
let me say why.
Okay, please explain.
Because I like them both for the same reason.
Okay.
The hosts are just incredible. I think that you can tell that they both take so much time when it comes to curating the questions that they do with every guest. And I think they do a really beautiful job at probably talking to the person prior about what are you comfortable discussing, but also not talking about it too much to the point where the actual filming seems inauthentic or seems very curated. Okay. And I think that it takes a very special skill to make people feel comfortable, especially people who have to spend most of their time hiding pieces of themselves from the world because so many eyes are on them. And people tend to feel incredibly comfortable with them. And that's a really hard thing to do, especially when you're on camera. Yeah. That's good. I do. Again, I've only seen a couple interviews that I've ever seen on Call Her Daddy. And again, I know that some people, they have their thoughts because of how it first started, and even some of the stuff that gets on there can be overly sexualized and stuff like that, which again, that's not my cup of tea. But I do think, it's kind of like, being able to look at it, I think she does a phenomenal job in how she interviews people, ask that. And again, definitely Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, again, about 3 months ago, probably heard about that pod, came across my TikTok feed, and I was like, man, what is this? And saw the way it looked, and it was just really, really good. And I think he does a phenomenal job of asking the right questions and diving in and getting people to, without even knowing, he just disarms people. And so where next thing you know, they're just telling stuff they've never said. You always hear that all the time. It's like, I've never really talked about this. I didn't expect to start crying. And so that's the show, as it is a good thing of a good interview. I think he does a really, really good job. One of my other podcasts, for me personally, is one called The Pivot. I love Scott Galloway, Carrie Swisher. Again, it's more about current cultural tech to, political stuff, whatever. They both kind of sit on the left, even though I sit center right, so I kind of like listening to people but who kind of sit on the other side. But Scott Galloway is actually incredibly thoughtful. A lot of people with Scott thinks he's like far right, and he's really like he's a Democrat, but people think he's right because he's actually very sensible in what he's actually saying, and very practical. He's about practical solutions, so I love kind of listen to it, and kind of they go back and forth, and so it's a really, really good podcast. So I'm always just curious about what you're listening to, what people are listening to, because again, I love content, I love information, I love learning, and again, if we can ever shout out somebody who, with our audience, man, go check those out. Diary CEO, Call Her Daddy. At your own discretion, going to watch this to Call Her Daddy, and then The Pivot as well. So with that being said, guys, let's jump into the pod.
All right, well, today, guys, we're going to be talking about this idea of the noble life, the noble life. This is something that I have been thinking about, this noble life, but really the hero within. You know, we live in a culture where heroes are shown a lot. We love the hero story. You know, you see the Marvel, the Marvel movies and DC movies and what that's turned into in the multi-billion-dollar industry that is. Or, when you turn on Netflix, we're always looking. We love those shows or those movies where there's a hero in it. But here's the question. Very few times do we actually look within to actually say, do we have a hero? Can we be a hero? Because I know for me, that's not something that I have really thought about until recently. Is there actually a hero within? And so, yeah, we're going to kind of dive into that.
It's so interesting that we're calling this one the hero within because last week we just did an episode about how we're made for war. And so those two concepts can sound a little bit contradicting. So
but it's a lot us though. That it is us. It's like one extreme to the next.
Love extremes.
Keep going, my bad.
Can you explain a little bit about how they may tie into one another?
Yeah, this idea of made for war was that human beings have to learn peace because we naturally just divide. And why this actually ties in, because I believe that heroes are people who actually do bring peace. When I think of peace, it's this idea, even that the word peace in Hebrew is shalom, which means wholeness. I think what heroes do is they bring wholeness to things that have been broken. And sometimes what heroes have to do is disrupt something that seems whole, but it's really not functioning well. It's the way society has kind of gone with it, and society's fine with it. But there's others being hurt. You think about it, society was fine with Jim Crow segregation. That was people were fine with it. And then there were people like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, and others who stood up as heroes to do what? What happened? It was very disruptive. People thought that, people with even in, say, the Christian world were against Martin Luther King. They were just saying, man, this guy he's divisive. This is not the way of Jesus. And what happened was that he stepped up to do what? Disrupt the status quo in order to to write new rules, to create something new. Because why? He knew that the flourishing of all men was super important. And it wasn't just only about, it was about seeing, black people being able to have equal rights. But it also was about, he knew long term that those who are white wouldn't fully walk in their full humanity unless they were able to experience other races, as equals. And so that cause. So heroes are people who I think actually do bring peace. And so I think so again, it's a long answer. I think that's why they actually tie together this idea of made for war, but then that's all today of this noble life of looking for the hero within.
I think it's very interesting that you brought up Martin Luther King, specifically because we're talking about how we're made for war, but also we have this hero within. And when you think about his life and the peace that he brought, there is also some serious turmoil that was going on within his personal life.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the interdependencies between the two?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Martin Luther King was a man, as we bring him up, that people look at him as a hero because he did disrupt something that was so vile, so evil, and brought real change. I'm able to stand here. We're able to sit here doing a podcast together, you as a white woman, me as a black man, without the fear of being arrested because we're just in a room together, because of just things that were there, or that, and the fact that me as a black man, I'm able to, lead and employ people. Before it was never a black person employing someone who was white. So he did some things that we actually see the benefit of. But here's the thing that's hard is that you saw that side of him, and man, you see the speeches, the courageousness, the willingness to go to jail, the willingness to be beat. But then on the other side, you saw him where, man, it's very commonly known that it was a lot of infidelity within his marriage. And so I think it's an interesting dynamic, because it's this thought of like, can someone be heroic and then have these kind of flaws? And I would say yes. Now, in any way am I saying, man, what he did there was fine? Absolutely not. But it's this idea, though, that in one area he did do this. And again, that's why. But I think also the level of pressure doesn't justify it. But it's like when you're doing something so much like you are, and you are constantly every day facing that, how important it is to actually have practices that you're doing that keep you out of the weeds, because you're having so much pressure. There comes a point where you have to relieve pressure. Now, the idea of talking, communicating, friendships, relationships, mindfulness, prayer, whatever you do, those things have to be a huge part of your life in order to manage that. Because when you're at such a level like that, again, I am at nowhere near that, but I feel those pressures and I understand those temptations to just go do something. You know what I'm saying? Again, whether, I've seen it where people go to alcohol, they go to they go to infidelity, they go to drugs, they go to whatever it is, they go to eating and things like that. And to be honest with you, kind of going into that's one of my things that I struggle with, is that when I feel those pressures, what it used to be is I would just eat. It wasn't like I'm just gorging myself, but it's just snacking, because it was like stress relief for me. Now, again, that's something minor and small, but I got to see it at a level. So I hope that makes sense. I know I just kind of right now, I'm like, my mind's jumping in different directions, because I think you can be noble and do some things and bring peace and be a hero. And then there's moments where, man, you could, that there's been some falters that are there. When I look back at Martin Luther King, I can say, man, I appreciate the heroic moment. But man, also I don't, I don't condone at all the infidelity that he did. And so it's kind of that constant tension that you actually have to walk in.
I feel like off that, my next question would be if you have any advice on how to hold two truths at one time. Because when I'm thinking of especially Gen Z, like looking at Martin Luther King, a lot of people would actually probably say, like, hey, you held this really strong boundary on something like nonviolence, but you weren't able to hold a very strong boundary within your marriage, for example. And that really starts to hit people a wrong way. And it really makes them start to like question, who was he really? Like, he might have done these good things, but also like who really was he? Yeah. And I think that that's true to things that happen in society today, and how people in power, people who will go down in history, are viewed currently now. Yeah. So do you have any advice on how to be able to hold those two truths at one time? Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is this. It's that you have to be honest. And what I mean by that, you have to first be honest with yourself, and how do you do that? For me, prayer is a way that I do that. Prayer is not something where I'm just going to God for me and just asking my request. A lot of times what prayer is for me is where, man, I am actually, I call dumping the box. I call it 5 minutes of real, to where I'm just being very honest. The deep, dark stuff that really is going on, the struggles I have, the anger I may have, the temptations I may have, and those things where I don't want to go those routes, but really just, and at times you're fighting and you're warring. And so I just really dump the box. I think that's really important. I also have really good friends who I can be very honest with. I think most people get themselves where, like you said, where they begin to have this life of it's very open this way, but then it feels like they're living this other life. It's because what they do is that we start putting our lives in compartments. And so like this one, I'm going to be fully here. Everybody sees this, but over here I'm not. It's because we stop being honest. And so, and again, we stop being honest because it's just those other pressures that we feel in life. And so that's the number one thing for me, is you have to be honest with yourself. You have to, sometimes we may have a thought and you're like, no, don't think that. Yes, I get, but then I always say, well, ask yourself why. Why are you having that thought of stepping out? Why are you having that thought of wanting to, get a bottle of pills? Why are you having that thought that I just don't want to have one drink, I want to have like 8 drinks? What's driving you? And I think because what we do is like we have the shame of don't think that, or don't do that, or we can't do that, instead of asking, okay, why? Because that's the thing. Yes, that's not okay, but you got to get to the driver. And so I think being honest allows you to really work through that. So if it's not prayer for you, if it's mindfulness, it's meditation, whatever. But I think having some place where you really can be fully honest. I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was just about how it's from a movie, and I'm so sorry I can't remember the movie, but it was about how a guy literally went into this tunnel in the cave. It was a popular movie, it's a cave, and he just screamed. It was just him by himself, and he screamed in the cave, like his honest feelings. He just screamed them in the cave, and how it really changed him. And I was listening to that, and I'm like, that's how it should be. You got to have a cave you can scream in, to where you can just be so bluntly honest. Sometimes, man, for me, it is literally me going in my car sometimes
and like cutting everything off, you know, because I get like paranoid. I'm like, man, we got cameras in the car, my phone, their iPhone, you know what I'm saying? You know,
So
Apple's listening right now. Somebody's gonna record this, and so I cut my phone off. I turn my car off. The whole deal,
so
you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
it's
like,
so real though.
Yeah, it is. And so
you become so hyper vigilant.
You do. And so then all of a sudden, you know, then I get real freaked out. I'm like, nah, man, you know what I'm saying? It's a satellite beaming down on my car or whatever.
No, nobody really cares.
Nobody really cares. But you do. But here's what you just, and there's those moments in my car where I just like, I scream, I voice where I'm at. And I can tell you, whenever that happens, I begin to change, because what it does, I get it out, but then I start doing the work to kind of get to the bottom of like what's going on. I think that's how you can start to not live in these separate lives. Human beings, I actually believe this, human beings, we are built in our world to not live integrated lives. Everything that we live in our world is always built in like living in different compartments. You remember they'll say, oh man, my work life, my home life. And you're like your emotions and pain and trauma, that joint just don't like, hey, you know what, man, you came into corporate building. Your trauma as a child, we're going to stay outside today. No, that trauma comes with you. That divorce comes with you. The struggle with your kids comes with you. And so we live in this lie that we live separate lives like that. And I don't think that's the case. I think the way you have to do that is be honest, and that allows you to live those integrated lives, so you don't have like this heroic side and then this really villain side, that you really are living both at the same time.
I think that is really great advice for the individual.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're in a situation that might be a little bit more systemic? For example, like let's say like our political leaders.
Yeah.
So they might pass a law that's something like no more abortions are allowed. They themselves have probably paid for people to have many. And so you're in the position where someone of power is leading you, and you're noticing these violations of integrity. How do you process through that? And what really can you do?
Well, let me back up and just say this part. I think that, you know, you're hitting on something, because human beings, like, we see something, we're like, man, like, yeah, they made this law, but then I know how you are. And so we think just, you know, because I get in arguments with some of my friends who are really into politics, it was just about the policy. And I'm like, it's not all about that, because I love how Ken Meyer says, not only what you make, but it's the idea of why you make it. So a lot of times, why you're making a policy does matter. The intent of that policy does matter. Though sometimes we just look at, well, the policy just says this. Well, no, the intent does actually make an impact. Matter of fact, right now, there's the whole conversation about banning TikTok or not. There's something, I can't remember the name of a bill that just came out, that a lot of like people, bipartisan, signed on, and then come to find out they didn't even read it. But what it is, it looks good. It's like, oh man, banning TikTok. But when you read it, it's an overarching law. It's a rule of law where you can actually like surveillance on like people's like social media platforms, everything. So now what it does, it broad brushes where pretty much they can step in, the government, at any point in time where they feel like it, however they define it, to step in to like be able to, you know, to spy and listen to stuff and shut stuff down. And that was not what people wanted. So you're like, well, that law, it looks, you know, it sounds good, but like when you actually read the intent of it, you're like, no, just like the Patriot Act. It sounded good, but then all of a sudden they gave the government full reign to do whatever they really wanted to do. So I think how you have to manage it is like, yes, I think it's not only what you're doing, but why you do it. But I also think you then have to be able to look at the policy as well. It's this weird thing. You got to look at the policy that, is this actually helpful? Regardless of how these people are like douchebags, regardless of that, right? Is this actually helpful? And so I had to like try to look beyond that, but it is really hard, because I think a lot of politicians, a lot of leaders right now, they're not putting laws in place, I believe, that's helpful for people. I think they're putting laws in place that just fit whatever, continue to push their political narrative that's going to continue to keep getting them elected. And that is the problem. Remember, I've said it before, power was always meant to be given away. I think a lot of political leaders live in a way to keep power. And when you do that, it just ultimately corrupts. It ultimately builds. Power is not bad. It's how you use power. And so I think that's kind of what we end up seeing.
Yeah. And I like the point that you made about motivations, because I think that's why Gen Z has such a strong reaction to politics, is because they have a lot more of a emotional ability to pick up on those things. And so they're going to focus a lot more on why people do what they do rather than what it is exactly that they do, I think, in my opinion. However, it's so focused externally.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that we take enough time to say, well, why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
We focus a lot more on what other people are doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah. No, it's really true. I think that we can look at everyone else. I think that's the problem with, and it's not just with Gen Z, it's with our whole culture now, is we look at everyone and we blame everyone and we look at all their stuff they do instead of actually using it as a teaching to say, man, I could be that. Think of the very worst, the people who you can't stand. Never make a mistake. You could absolutely be that person. You could be, if you don't like Donald Trump, you can be as manipulative and arrogant or narcissistic as he is. Or if you don't like Joe Biden or whoever, whatever the person is, you can become that. And I think what we've done, we've stopped learning and saying, hey, instead of us criticize, it's okay to critique and look and say, that's wrong. But when you start now bringing pitchforks and you start bringing, man, it's shame culture, that is where it's now an issue because there's no redemption in culture. The issue that's happening there's no redemption. There's like, we are living in a world where we like redemption in movies. We do not like redemption in real life. We don't like the stories of somebody who really messed up. And then we're saying, man, you know what? Hey, can we give them another chance? And you see them come around. We don't like that nowadays. Like, man, there's certain things you do this. There's no redemption that can ever come to you. And I think that's wrong because here's the thing. When you look within, can you imagine if you didn't get redemption or another opportunity through stuff? So when I look at people, I try to really look at them with empathy. I'm able to hold that, man, that is wrong. That's not okay. But inside, man, there's still compassion. And I hope for redemption that can actually happen with that process. So I think when you look at people, you got to look at people, see what's happening, see, hey, is any of that in me? Because that's how you actually grow. That's how you actually get better.
You know, something that makes me think about is something I said on the last podcast, which is you can only extend as much grace to others as you have for yourself. And so something that makes me really, really sad is that as a culture right now, we lack so much compassion for other people. So I just wonder what people's internal dialogues are within themselves. I think that speaks a lot to the depression and suicide increase that we've seen.
I do, because what we were taught was this. I think, and it's going to sound like it doesn't add up, but it does. Because we many times don't like to face tough things, it doesn't grow resilience in you. And a lot of times what resilience can do when you've been through stuff, man, it actually can build some grace for yourself and some whatever, because you're like, yo, I remember who I used to be. And now I'm there. I think, when people talk about your generation and how they're not tough and whatever, and I'm like, it was because the parents weren't. We were the ones running in to the teachers when you got it. You never ran a lap in gym and you got an F. And then we run in and, and just go nuts and crazy. And the teachers and the administration just don't want to deal with you. So they just give you an A. That doesn't build resilience in your kid. It didn't build resilience in you to have to sit in that. And so I think the lack of grace, I agree with you, the lack of grace that we actually have today toward people, because we don't actually have that compassion toward ourselves. But we don't have compassion toward ourselves because we haven't built resilience. We haven't been through some stuff. As soon as we start to feel some type of way, it's just trying to get the pain away. And I can tell you, through walking through things in my life and having to have resilience, it's actually built a greater compassion for me, for people, because I know how hard it was to go through this. So when I see somebody going through it, I'm like, whoa, I know what they're walking through right now. So it leads to compassion. And what it also leads to compassion in me is because it reminds me of wins I've had. Man, yeah, you know what? God, I'm not great at this right now. I'm struggling with this. But, man, you know what? I am better than what I used to be. And so it doesn't mean I'm not striving to be better, but I'm also have to keep that. People move forward when they have motive. And listen, we all move forward when there's positive stuff. When somebody's behind you, behind you, rooting you on, blah, 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 it does something to you, but we don't do that to ourselves. I mean, there's tons and tons of negative self-talk in a culture, in a world, what's funny, that talks so much about positivity, a culture that talks about, good vibes only. But when you really get them alone, that's not how they live. That's just not how they live. They live with such negative self-talk.
This is kind of taking me back to the topic of nobility, which we started with, because to me, someone who is noble is someone who is able to be sacrificial and incredibly compassionate. How would you define nobility?
I define nobility as someone who lives outside of themselves, that their lives are about the service of others. But here's the thing, in being about the service of others, to really be well, to take care of people, you have to take care of yourself. But it's the motivation. I'm taking care of myself so that I can be the best I can be for the world. That is the difference in today's world. We do self-care, therapy, all the stuff for ourselves. And that's why it's not going anywhere. That's why depression is continuing to rise. That's why suicide is continuing to rise. That is why, we are seeing loneliness at the highest level we've ever seen it. It's because self-care, all those things, they're all about us. And it's not about humanity. And that's where, again, and here's the thing, the generation that came before us, here's the difference with them. They didn't take care of themselves. It was just about others out of codependency or whatever, others. And then ultimately, they end up just, inside having no feelings, no enjoyment. No, man, it's just like, this is the job, you do the job. And I actually think there's a tension. I think you can enjoy what you do and push forward, but also with a sacrificial heart and things like that. But I think a noble human, a noble man, a noble woman is someone whose entire lives is lived at the service of others out of a pure place, not out of getting love, not out of not out of somebody worshiping you or giving you things, not to manipulate somebody, but you're like, no, freely again, one of my favorite verses, freely I receive, so freely I give. So the whole idea that you live a life that in full service to others, I think that's the most noble life. And that's why I believe every human has a hero within them, because every person has the ability to serve others. Now, you may not have it at the level of somebody on a global scale, but you may have it in your community, in your neighborhood, at your kids' school, kids' sports teams, at your work, to where you live in a way that's just about the betterment of others around you.
Was there anyone who lived a noble life that was within your direct sphere when you were a child?
Yeah, my high school basketball coach, I only had him for 1 year, Roger Kramer. He is I haven't seen Coach in probably, it's been almost 25 years since I've seen, maybe a little bit less than that, I've seen him. And the one thing about Coach was is that I wish I would have played for him for all 4 years, because he really had this moral integrity about him. He was a guy who, he was hard on me, but I knew how much he loved me. I was a preseason McDonald's, preseason potential McDonald's All-American, and he loved me, and he didn't coach me with kid gloves. How he was with me here was how he was off the court. I watched how he loved his wife, his daughter, his son. He was a guy, man. He's a high school basketball coach, so it wasn't like they were making a ton of money and things like that. The way his attention to the craft and what he did was just for the betterment of us. He wanted us to be better men. That's when every time I'm around. That's why today, if Coach called me, I would drop everything to go do whatever he would need from me, because just for that year, I became a better man because of Roger Kramer. And because I was a better man because of Roger Kramer, it's now, I think even to this day, I'm impacted by that. He really did live this noble life. And again, he was not a perfect man, but he really just showed me, without me even knowing, as I've gotten older, I've just have drawn more and more appreciation to the noble life he lived.
Is there anyone who didn't live a noble life, and how did that impact you?
Ooh, now we're getting spicy now.
Let me start.
First off,
but that's what's special about nobility, is that it really is few and far between. And I wish it was more, but that's what gives you that feeling when you finally meet somebody who has that.
Yeah. I would say that, here's another one that's interesting. My first high school coach, he's in the military and stuff like that, and he played like he was a noble person. And there were some sacrificial things he did, but at the end of the day, it wasn't from a pure place. It was out of insecurity, out of control, dominance, things like that, to where it looked that way. It looked like it was about that. But as soon as, you would start thinking about something, you start having conversations about the betterment of self and whatever. And I'll tell the story. Like, man, he was frustrated with my father for not hiring. My father was the head basketball coach, and he didn't hire him to be one of his assistant coaches. So what he did was punish me for it. So as a kid who was slated to play varsity basketball as a freshman, or definitely JV with a team that was going to the state Final Four, went to the state Final Four the year before, was planning on going to the state again, very good team, he puts me on the freshman team. And it had nothing to do with I deserved to be on the freshman team. It was a shot at my father for not hiring him. And so I saw that, and I lived in that. I lived in this world to where I had this man doing this to me. And I'm like, who a guy who I loved, like I chose, I mean, because again, being a good player, I had a choice of what high school I wanted to go to. I chose to be with him, but because of something that two adults, because my father didn't want to hire him, whatever, I get put in the crosshairs of that. And I just saw it over my 3 years with him, how he really had these moments of really manipulation. Again, it wasn't like because that's the thing, it wasn't like he didn't have like these moments where he did really good stuff. That's the hard part, is when you see somebody, you're like, well, didn't they do this? You're like, yeah, but this is what you get to see. When pressure hits, you get to see what's really there. That's when I can tell somebody, when pressure hits, who are you? How do you live? Is it still about others, or now does it really become about protecting yourself? That's what I tell people. I don't know what I have in a relationship, friendship, or anything until your will and my will crosses. Then we begin to see, because when pressure hits, will you go to survival for people? I have worked with people who we were going to rock out together, whatever. But what I learned really quick, when things got tough for them, it's this visual I got. We're in a room, it's me and you, and somebody comes in here with a gun, and you got a gun, and it's for your survival. Is it to shoot me or shoot them? You're going to turn around for your survival, shoot me. You don't care. And see, that is where I think that for some people, pressure moments really begins to expose the noble life or not.
Do you think that you live a noble life?
That's a really thoughtful question. I never, again, even though I was like working on the stuff, the hero within and all that, and I mean, I've never really thought about it, but yeah, I do think I actually live that way. And I actually believe that, I see a lot of people out there. See, why this is so important, because we're living in a world right now that really does need some heroes. They need some noble men and women. But noble men and women who aren't just thinking about, man, hey, let me just go, when we think of nobility sometimes and becoming a hero, we think from a global scale. And my whole thing is like, no. Like your community, your county, your neighborhood, your home, your school, your sports teams, they need you to be heroes. The whole world doesn't need you to be the hero. Like, the world you have, you need to be a hero in that world. And that's what we're looking for. That's what the generations are needing. They're needing to see men and women who are willing to live noble lives outside themselves in a culture that is really full of themselves. I think that's super important. And so I want to ask you this question, is that, do you actually think you live a noble life?
This is something that I've actually put a lot of thought to, because my name means nobility. I think that I lean towards no. And I think that is because when I think of nobility, I think a lot of integrity. And when I think about integrity, I think of someone who like really knows what they stand for and like uses that grit in everything they do. And stands really strongly on those things. And I think that because I have been kind of hollow, like in the past, I've been kind of a hollow person, and I've been working a lot to really fill myself out. And so I think I'm still learning what those things are. Like, what are the main things for me? Like, what's tier 1, most importance, tier 2, tier 3 kind of thing. And I think that because I don't know that at times, I can really struggle with what to do in situations when it comes down to it. If that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. I appreciate your honesty in that. I think, my encouragement to you is that I think, there's certain things, and I guess I would ask that question. Are there certain things that man, like I really believe this? Is there one thing that you really believe that you actually feel like you live out? If you don't have the answer, I have one for you, but...
Let me take a shot at it myself first.
Okay, let's do it.
I think that I do live a sacrificial life. I think that I'm 23. I almost said 24. Not 24, I'm 23. And there's a lot of things that I could justify doing. I think the way that I live with my body, the way that I spend my money, what I do with my time, I could justify, and especially because of things that have happened in my past, doing a lot of things that I choose not to do. At the end of the day, because I've chosen to live a path where I do, at least it still feels like striving for authenticity. I think it is a process, but I have been really committed to that process, and I think that's the purpose of what I'm supposed to do right now. And I think at some point I'll know more. But the purpose that I know right now, I think that I am living out. And I think that by me doing that, other people have been impacted by it.
100%. And that's what I was going to say. I was going to say more of like loyalty. I think like loyalty is a value of yours. And I think you like really fight to live that, to do that, and not just say that I'm loyal, because that's what everybody wants to be loyal until it actually costs you something, to where it's like, man, you know, loyalty where I've seen it for you, where it's like, oh no, that was at a detriment to you. You know, that impacted not only you, that can impact finances. You know, I mean, think about what we've, you know, I see that with what we've built. You know, it was one of those situations where we're like, hey, we stepped in and we started working on this consulting firm, and it was like, you know, it wasn't a ton of money on the front end that I could pay you, but you were like, no, I'm committed to try to see how we can make this work. And you've stayed the course and you've done it, and you've been willing to, you know, to ride the wave, good, bad, or whatever. And so, you know, I think that is something that, you know, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the older you get, the more you start to see more of your values, the more you have a greater understanding of self, because like you said, there's things from our past that really buries a lot of who we are. And the more you become that, the more you become more aware, and then you begin to live that. But I think for what you know, I actually think you really do. You know, I see it, you know, with you impact those around you. I think those in our, you know, in my family, you know, they're impacted by, you know, the sacrificial stuff that you actually do, you know, for them. So I actually think it is. Let me ask you this question. Was there anybody that you grew up with that actually lived a noble life?
The first person that comes to my mind is my grandma, and I'm from Polk County, so I call her Mima.
Shout out, hey,
shout out Mima, and shout out Polk County.
Hey.
863.
Dude, Polk, hey, if you know, you know. If you from Florida, you listen to this podcast, you know how they
Bartow
get
specifically.
You know how they get down in Polk County. Hey, Polk County, a different part of Florida.
So why I would say her is because when I think of people that are noble, I think of a lot of people who you just don't really see, or you wouldn't typically label as noble. Like you think usually of people who have all this influence and all this power. But when I think about her, I think about how she had the direct sphere of influence around her, and I feel like she really has like taken it on to care for that, and me being one of those things. Like an example is that I've never slept well. I've always had like nightmares and things like that. So whenever I was 4, I have these super vivid memories of like up to 10 to 15 times in the middle of the night throughout like 1 to like 8. I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would just be like, you know, on edge. And every single time she would rock me to sleep and she would sing to me. And I am Christian. I wasn't at this point in time. But she would always sing "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," like an old school hymn. And so now, anytime I wake up in the middle of the night, if I'm like super stressed or anxious, that song plays in my head.
Wow.
And so that's something that has impacted my life like nothing else.
Yeah.
And it's so small to me now, also very big to me now in other ways. But it was a very big cost to her. I mean, she was in her 50s, waking up 10 to 15 times in the middle of the night, like dead tired, like rocking me to sleep over and over and over again. And so that was something that did cost her, but has changed the trajectory of my life because of how much peace it brings me now.
Yeah, that is a incredible story, and I think it's an incredible way to end, because that is something very small in the eyes of society and the world that's changed your world. And I think that's why being a hero within and defining that as someone who lives outside themselves in whatever world that you've been given. Not everyone has the grace to impact and touch a world like an Elon or a Steve Jobs or whatever person you want to think about. But the fact that what we do have is like the world we do have, like, man, what can I do? Because, you know, when you're living a noble life, a hero's life lives beyond just their life. You know, because if you think about that, what she did for you and how that's able to help you and to comfort you, it will be something to where you feel that impact. So, you know, when you have kids or in the future, when, you know, those who you're around, like that, you able to still move and go forward to be able to in life, it's because of something somebody did that seems so small of an act, but it was so sacrificial because of what she gave up. She gave up sleep, she gave up time, you know, to be able to do that, and then constantly, and how that stays there. So, I mean, that's an amazing thing. And as we close, here's why we wanted to talk about this, is because I mean, as we talk about writing new rules, what the world needs heroes. They are looking for men and women to be heroes, to live a noble life. So wherever you find yourself today, live that way. Live outside of yourself. Begin to ask yourself that question. How can I live outside? Am I living outside? If you're not, be honest. It's okay. Because let me tell you, that's where you get to work. When you actually are honest with yourself, that's when you can begin to get better. To say to yourself, man, I'm not living a noble life. I am living for myself. I'm really a villain. I am not the hero. So what I'm going to do today is actually begin to live that and think of one practical way you can take that step. And again, it is what the world is looking for. Stop looking to politicians and global leaders and tech, and our Messiah worship for tech giants, and just begin to be a hero wherever you have been placed. And if you do that, the world will get better. That is our job while we're here, to write new rules and just to move the world just a little bit further while we have this time on this earth. So until next time, keep writing new rules.